Hey everyone, welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia Tales. I'm your host Adrian Martinez, and of course I'm joined by my co-host Salvatore Polisi, also known as Sally Ubats. Today's episode is about Joe Colombo. Sal and I talk about why Joe Colombo started the Italian Civil Rights League and why the Mafia hated Joe Colombo for this. Furthermore, me and Sal go into the day that Joe Colombo was shot by Jerome Johnson. Sal gives his opinion about the situation. The guys that Sal was with were in the Colombo family underneath the Persico faction, and the Persicos didn't really get along with Joe Colombo, so that's another thing me and Sal go into. Another thing that we cover is who was really behind the shooting of Joe Colombo. It is very much believed that Joey Gallo was the man for this failed hit, but either way, this whole situation still happened and a lot of people are interested about it, so let's get into it. One quick thing before we get started with this podcast. This episode is just half of it. The rest of it's on Patreon. If you want to get our full podcast, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Our Patreon channel link is in the video description below. Coming on, Sal. How you doing this morning?
Good. Good morning. Yeah.
This is our earliest live, or not live, but recording we've done at 6 a.m. where I'm at, and it's 4 where Sal's at. So, yeah. I mean, we're making this happen. But today's episode is going to be talking about where Sal was when Joe Colombo was killed at the rally, or not killed at the rally, but shot, my bad. And eventually I think he died 6 or 7 years after. And we're going to talk about what Sal's thoughts were on the whole Joe Colombo thing. So what was your thoughts? What was he involved with going with the whole Italian Civil Rights League?
Well, I think prior to him getting shot, which I think was April of 72, he had created this Italian Civil Rights League where Italians all got together, and thought they were unjustly investigated by the feds. And many Italians didn't like the exposure. A lot of the mob guys in and around the inside part of organized crime, they weren't very excited about Colombo's efforts to go public. So on one side, he might have had some, supporters and admiration. On the other side, the guys that were involved in organized crime, they thought he was a buffoon. I mean, really.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine so. I mean, any gangster or any criminal going public, you want to, is going to be looked at as like, what the hell? But I mean, you want to,
right,
as a criminal, you want to stay low key and stay out
right.
of the whole limelight and everything. So, what do you think even inspired him to even want to start this whole league? And I mean, did he really want the fair? I mean, not the fairness of because I mean, he was trying to say, oh, the mafia doesn't exist, but he was the freaking boss. I mean,
yeah, it was kind of strange. I mean, I didn't know the guy personally, but I think little by little, what came down from the top was that he was an egotistical guy who thought he could cover up his real involvement with all organized crime and the mob by going public and trying to get sympathy from from other Italians. I don't think it all worked the way he thought it was going to work, and of course, nobody would have dreamed that he was going to be publicly shot. And I think everything fell apart for him. And of course, the mob wasn't stupid. They needed another figure there. So they had some temporary guys that stepped up to take control of the family.
Right. And so the day that he got shot, I mean, there was a lot that went into that because there were, if you've told me to watch the TV show, The Offer, and that was a really good one with Joe Colombo
right.
being involved with The Godfather. So anybody that hasn't watched that, I recommend you guys watch this. It's a 10-episode series on Paramount. I mean, it was really good, but it really portrayed Joe Colombo and his involvement with The Godfather, but it also showed that Joe Colombo was really loved by all the Italian community because he literally manipulated them into thinking like that he's for them. I mean, he had to have been a really good convincer on that part, but I think it's still around to this day, but I'm sure they changed over the whole course of the time. But in that movie, he wanted to make sure he portrayed that, he said the African Americans, they have their group, and I don't know, maybe he said the Mexicans or something. I don't remember, but everybody had their own group. So he did his. But I mean, eventually it caused a lot of attention because he was doing public speaking engagements and so on. So it just didn't look good. And I think the head the head bosses that were on the commission, like maybe Carlo Gambino and Lucchese. I don't think they like that. What do you
No,
think about that?
they really didn't like him. I mean, in in actual movements of what went on, they looked down upon Colombo. So he wasn't really very well respected by the other mob families. And at the same time, there was all this secret, rebellion and the Colombo Wars, and guys were, jockeying for position like Persico. And there was other guys that were trying to take over the family. So um, most of the guys that were lower echelon guys in the street, even Cataldo, who was a hitman for the Colombos, he was disgusted with what Joe Colombo did, going public. It was interesting because that was, 1972, I think. Well, eventually here we are 15 years later in the 80s. And what does Gotti do? He goes public. So, yes, organized crime suffered from the exposure, but these guys were egomaniacs. Like, when I look at John Gotti, I look at Donald Trump, I see the two same personalities,
Oh
just
yeah,
egotistical narcissists, who think that they can get away with anything. And that's exactly what happened with Gotti. Eventually, I think the public will see through who Donald Trump is. But I mean, there's all kinds of things going on that we, the general public, we're not even familiar with what goes on behind the scenes with these high profile characters.
yeah. I mean, you really don't. It's like if you got money, and back then, I mean, times were different. There wasn't cameras. There wasn't all this footage and all this crap. So I mean, it's people's word over this rich billionaire. I mean, what do you what do
Right.
you expect? But I mean, with the whole Colombo thing, though, I was just gonna say it's uh, it's really weird how everything was hush hush up until he got shot. I mean, we don't know what really happened, but I mean, it's really portrayed in shows and movies, and of course, you research, and it says that Joey Gallo was the one that was behind it,
Right.
and with Jerome Johnson, he had one of his buddies that he met in prison. He had gotten
Right.
close with the African gang. Is that correct? To your knowledge, you think?
As far as, it was mostly rumors,
Hmm.
that what was going on. But here we were, live and in color. I mean, Colombo's up there, he gets shot, and the guy who did the shooting, he gets killed right there on the spot,
No.
and never again. I mean, if you think about that execution or that crime itself, it was very similar to what happened to Kennedy. Kennedy
Yeah.
gets shot. Um, if it was Oswald, which it probably was, he gets killed. The shooter gets killed himself not long after shooting Kennedy. So it was very uh, similar type of execution.
Yeah.
Of
And
course, Colombo lived, but
yeah, he was in a wheelchair and stuff. I don't know if he was in a vegetable state or whatever, but I mean he lived to be go on 7 years. But after that, you said his whole reputation and everything just went downhill. Is that
right,
correct?
right,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, most of the guys in the street wanted all of it to go away,
Hmm.
not recognize what was going on. But 72 was a pretty instrumental year. The movie The Godfather came out. J. Edgar Hoover died. This all happened in the same month, by the way, if you go back and look at it. So
Hmm.
there was an impact, with all these events that was going on. And of course, the guys in organized crime wanted to keep everything quiet, but that's not really what happened. And of course, you had the FBI looking at watching everybody. But in those days, we didn't have video cameras. So everything was hush hush. It was done very secretly.
Yeah, and okay, so now I think a good way to move forward is like talking about how what led up to Joe Colombo getting killed. I mean, we see the stuff with Joey Gallo, of course, and his motive. I mean, they Joey Gallo. I mean, like he was always known for being wild, and I mean he started the first internal like big war with the Profacis versus the Gallo crew. and they were all, they'd go on to be Colombo and stuff. But
Right.
and then the peace settled down for a while. But what was his whole beef with like Colombo and starting this whole other second big internal war?
Well, he had come out of jail and he wanted recognition. He wanted, his own little territory, a piece. He wanted a piece of the pie, and you know, he was he was just a legendary guy immediately when he came out of jail. He was really like a celebrity in New York City. Hanging out with actors and Hollywood people and playwrights. But he didn't live long. I mean, they killed him quickly. So
Yeah, they did.
yeah,
I mean, when he got out, he got out for a while, but then, you know, what we can do is like we could walk up to the steps of his death. I mean, so when he got out, him and Joe Colombo, they had their beef almost immediately. He wanted, like you said, he wanted his part, and
yeah.
Joe gave him what, $1,000. It was.
Crumbs. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. They wanted to just give him a few crumbs. Let him just go out there and build his own gambling operation or whatever. But I guess he had a different vision. He wanted to take over the whole family,
yeah.
and that wasn't going to happen. There's too many other tough guys that were around that could protect their own interests. So by
Mhm.
taking him out, there was less focus, on the family's inner war. I mean, there was always a war going on for control. Now, the
Yeah.
other families didn't have that stuff going on at the same time. They were really quiet. They kept everything, undercover.
And yeah, like me, I've never heard of anything about a Lucchese war, inside their family like that. I mean, sure there was hits and stuff that went on, but
Right,
like a whole war where there was wartime. I mean,
right.
you never hear that. I mean, same with the Gambinos. I never. They might have had some internal hits and stuff, but it was never a major war. I mean, they would get the other faction to come along with the other faction and take out their boss or whatever the hell it may have been. I mean, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting on why the Columbos had so much internal wars. I mean, it's
And,
just
and it went on for years and years, all the way into the 90s, by the way.
damn, yeah.
You
So,
could read about the first Colombo War, the second Colombo War. I was more around the Gambino guys, and uh, the best I can say is that Carl Gambino was the boss, and then this Della Croce guy, he would come out and visit the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. We would walk from the club about 4 blocks to a restaurant, and it would be like a procession. It'd be Gotti, Angelo up front with Della Croce, and Foxy and I would be trailing in the back. And we'd go to this restaurant and we'd sit at this restaurant. And the guy, he himself, Della Croce, was like a legendary guy. So
mhm,
that was Angelo's uncle.
yeah,
So Gotti got good. He got real good respect out of Della Croce.
yeah,
So I mean, the Gambinos, they were solid right from the top down, and that was in 72, 73. Because Carlo Gambino didn't die until 76.
hmm,
So they had a really strong, united family. And Cataldo let me do whatever I want with those guys because he was in control of me.
yeah.
Gotti might make a suggestion, but I didn't have to answer to John Gotti. I
No,
had to answer to Cataldo.
right. I mean, at the end of the day, you had to know what family was yours. I
Right,
suppose is what they say.
exactly. And the whole Colombo thing was very hush hush, like I said, the whole inner workings of the war and all that. And as soon as Colombo had gotten shot, he lost all his power. The other factions of the family were continuing on. Whether or not there was paying up to the boss at the time, I don't know. I think it was around a year later I started to report to Joe Brancato, who
Yeah.
became the acting boss of the family. I actually went to his house. He had a small little house in Middle Village, and I went there and I brought him, I brought him some money in an envelope, left the envelope quietly. It was all very respectful, and he didn't have a tough guy attitude. He was very polished. This
Yeah.
guy Brancato. He was one of the you know temporary bosses, acting heads of the family. So I got to meet him,
After
and
Columbo was shot.
yeah, after Colombo was shot. I mean, much to people making observations about who I was and where I was. I didn't have any connection, official connection to the Gambino guys at all. I just
Right.
happened to work with Foxy, who
Yeah.
was under John Gotti.
Right.
Okay.
Gotti and all those
Cataldo
guys.
left it that way because we were making a lot of money. We did a lot of robberies, a lot of hijackings.
Yeah.
So when Colombo got shot, it had no impact on us at all.
Yeah. So
Us in the street, the guys in the street, had
right.
no impact on us.
Yeah. I mean, it would just continued as business as usual. So
Right.
now I think we can walk into the day that Joe Colombo was shot. Where well, let's talk about where he was shot and why and how it went down, and then we can talk about what when you heard about it. What were your thoughts and where were you at and so on. But let's just discuss from your knowledge what happened that day.
I wasn't really paying attention. It's just like you might remember where you were 9/11. You might remember where you were on certain dates.
Yeah.
you know, but I wasn't paying attention to that upper echelon of the family. As far as I knew, he was shot, and you didn't ask a lot of questions back then. Okay. I listened to Michael Franzese a few times. And then when I spent 2 days with him, we never once talked about the Colombo shooting. But he was actually there that day that Colombo was shot.
I remember hearing this video too.
Yeah, yeah. So he was up close, and he was able to try to understand how that all happened. I
Yeah.
think he might have been 18 years old or something like that. And but I never talked much about it with anybody. That whole Colombo shooting, it was just sort of glossed over.
Yeah.
We had other fish to fry. I mean, really.
Right. So, I mean, when he did die, though, I mean, he was on his rally, he was doing his speaking engagement, and then from what we know in history is that he got shot. An African American, Jerome Johnson, went in there and just shot him while he was on stage talking, and he didn't die, but I mean, he came close to it that day. And what I
Well,
mean,
Johnson was killed right there on the scene.
yep, yep, and then there's that as well. So he was killed.
Nobody really knows who shot the shooter. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, he was killed right there amongst all the confusion and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it made big news and all. But as soon as that stuff took place, the guys in the street, they moved ahead. I mean, it didn't stop you from trying to make money just
Mm-mm.
because the boss was shot. You had to continue.
Yeah, and with Joey Gallo, what did he advance to? He just because he wasn't around too much longer after that. But for him, what do you think he was going to be getting out of it?
I think he was taking a shot at taking over the whole Colombo family. I mean, that's what he probably wanted to do. That was his intention. But there was a lot of made guys and real tough guys around at that time. They wouldn't let him get away with that. I mean, and there was all kinds of other things going on. I mean, when you read about years later, guys like Scarpa, who was an informant, he was given the government information about all of this. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing what took
Oh, okay.
place undercover also.
I didn't even really think about that because, yeah, he probably was. I mean, he was right there in that Colombo family, so
Right,
I'm sure
right.
the FBI got a lot of good intel
Oh,
from him on that.
absolutely. Yeah,
But so you think Joey Gallo and Greg Scarpa they were around in the same time? So I mean, do you
right.
think they probably had a few encounters, maybe talking about the whole deal?
Oh,
I
I'm
don't know.
sure they did. I mean, everybody was jockeying for a piece of the pie, but you had to continue making money, whatever your gig was. If it was gambling or if it was hijacking, whatever it was. Again, in those days, nobody admitted to being a drug dealer. So for Cataldo and I, we were dealing heroin. We had to be real quiet, and we didn't talk about any of this.
No.
And I think that to me, that was one of the unique parts of my relation with Cataldo, dealing heroin and all, and being very quiet about it. I mean, I couldn't even talk to Foxy about it. Foxy knew in the 70s I was dealing heroin, but the Gambinos had a strict policy about that. They didn't want any of their guys dealing drugs.
Yeah, and I remember in your movie, I think Foxy came up to you and said, "Hey, man, they're gonna fucking kill you, man. They know you're if they find out you're dealing in this shit." But
Right. Yeah. I mean, but there was guys inside. I mean, look at Angelo Ruggiero. His brother was a major drug dealer.
oh yeah, Salvatore
By the
Ruggiero.
way, John Gotti hated Sal Ruggiero. He hated him because the guy made a fortune. Everything he did, he made a lot of money. And eventually, he died accidentally in an airplane crash. But things were happening, and a lot of it was, undercover, very, very quiet about drug dealing. But the Gambinos were completely against it for a long time until they realized how much money was involved.
Yeah, and as well, I wanted to go in with you as Dominic Cataldo. He was with the Persico faction, so he didn't really even get along with Joe Colombo. I mean, what was the issue there?
I don't know. I think it was who lined up with who, and they had to pick sides. The guys in the street. I mean, that was really above me, and I didn't pay attention to that. I wasn't really interested in the structure and the power of the Colombo crime family. All I was interested in is being allowed to work with who I wanted to work with, like Tommy DeSimone was with Paulie Vario, Lucchese guys, and then Foxy was with the Gambino guys. That was our whole focus in 72. I was 27 years old. I mean, I was wild and crazy. We were doing crimes that people wouldn't even do. I mean, we were very audacious about the hijackings and bank robberies we did. I mean, Gene Gotti, who's alive today, he had to get away from us. As John told him, that guy Ubats is going to get you killed. He's too wild and crazy. I mean, we'd go right into the airport and stick up a terminal. I mean, we did wild and crazy stuff that summer and continued on. I mean, the Godfather movie came out right around the same time. I think it might have been a month after Colombo had been shot. I thought that was interesting how that coincided with the release of the movie.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about that. I mean, Joe Colombo. So, like I said, I watched that, The Offer, that series on Paramount, and it showed Joe Colombo's involvement with The Godfather. So,
Right.
at first he didn't like it. He didn't want it to be made, but then
Right.
he changed his mind. And
Yeah.
so why didn't he like it, for the people that don't
I
know?
don't know, but I found it so interesting when they released The Offer, the involvement that Al Ruddy guy had with organized crime. They liked him. They
Yeah.
liked him, and all of a sudden, maybe because Colombo himself was a maverick and a renegade in the sense of organized crime structure in New York, and of course the other families, they didn't want any part of the movie or Colombo. And when the
Mhm.
movie came out, the Gambinos and the other families, they sort of put an X on it. We don't want you going to see the movie. And that's the way it was in 72 when the movie came out. I think it was in May of 72. I mean, by that time, Foxy, Tommy, and I, we were crime partners. So we were only interested in how much crime we could commit, how we can get away with it. And everybody kicked up to their guys. Like, I don't know what Tommy gave Paulie, and I don't know what Foxy gave John Gotti, but it was really a very personal thing when you kicked up to the guy you were
Yeah.
working under.
If you want to continue watching this episode, because this is only the halfway mark, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. We offer all of our exclusive interviews on there. Our Patreon link is in the video description below. Hey, thanks for watching this clip. This clip came from our Patreon channel. The name of our podcast is A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. Me and Sal's podcast is all about his life in the Mafia. Salvatore was a Colombo associate. Salvatore, also known as Sally Ubats, has many stories about committing crimes with all 5 of the New York crime families, such as hijacking, bank robberies, heists, and much more. Sal has many criminal stories about him and other high-ranking mobsters, such as John Gotti, Peter Gotti, Gene Gotti, Jimmy Burke, Angelo Ruggiero, Henry Hill, Dave Icovetti Sr., Tommy DeSimone, Dominic Cataldo, Joe Brancato, and many more. During his time as a mobster, he had a social club he opened called the Sinatra Club. He would later go on to write a book and a movie about his time in the Sinatra Club. Sal has a lot of untold stories about John Gotti that people haven't heard. And as myself, my name is Adrian Martinez. I've been doing a podcast for the last 2 years. It's called Invest in Yourself Podcast. I've done a number of Mafia interviews the last few years. I've done interviews with Mafia associates, made men, and capos, also known as bosses. Salvatore and I have decided to partner up to start our own podcast, to drop some new untold stories about the Mafia. Please subscribe to mine and Sal's Patreon account to watch all of our full exclusive videos about Sal's life in the Mafia. The link to subscribe to our Patreon channel is in the video description below.